Hey guys, Mulligan here, and welcome to part 4 of my preview of the upcoming Eternal set, the Dusk Road. We'll be talking about the cards from the upcoming expansion that have been spoiled this past week. Since you guys are seeing this on Monday, it will probably be mere hours until another set of cards are spoiled, if they haven't been spoiled already. As with the omens of the past preview videos, I will only be talking about the cards as far as their use and constructed, unless the card is absolutely terrible in that format, in which case I will briefly talk about its potential use in draft. Let's hop in. First up is Topple Tower. This is a 3 power 0/4 unit, requiring 1 fire influence to play, and this has +2 strength for each grenadin in your void. The name of this card was actually spoiled quite some time ago in Discord, but no one really knew what to make of it, and nothing was said about if it was a card name, a new mechanic, or anything. I didn't think much of this one at first, but this is a tribal set. I imagine we're going to get more cards that help grenadins. This has synergy with the ever lovable scrap tank, and of all the tribes right now, grenadins have the easiest ways of creating multiple tokens with a single card. 4 health is pretty solid for a 3-drop, though that might mean less in this case since it's probably going to take some time to get this to a high enough strength stat to where it's actually a threat. So probably the mid to late game. I could see Stone Scar Sacrifice decks using this card, especially if Bloodright Callous continues to not be a thing. Now the next card is Cowardice, a 2 power curse requiring 1 shadow influence to play. While this is equipped, the cursed unit can't block. This card has a very interesting effect to me. I'm concerned it's not going to be enough though. This does have potential in aggro as a way to try and finish the game if your other removal isn't going to get you past the problem your smaller units are facing. That seems pretty narrow though. In terms of use in mid-range or control decks, if you put this on one of your opponent's more threatening units, you'd also have to have a unit that just brick walls that same unit, because if you only have removal, then you're just 2-for-1ing yourself by playing this card on it. It seems like this card would be really good in board stall situations in those decks. The only deck that creates board stalls and runs shadow cards is Big Xenon, and I doubt they have room to fit this in. Maybe this has more potential in draft in the same way it does in a constructed aggro deck. The next card is Curse of Taxation, a 4 power cursed relic, requiring 1 justice influence to play. While this is equipped, the cursed player has -1 maximum power. Is it me, or are we getting a lot of curse cards in this set? Maybe we'll find out why in a bit. Given the lore behind the Dusk Road though, it makes sense. There's a lot of gloom and possible doom in the Dusk Road. I think the biggest problem with this card is the cost though. 4 just seems like too much to pay for this. This is probably good against decks that have major interaction points between turns 4 and 6, so that would be most time-based mid-range decks like Praxis and Elysian mid-range. But not affecting the board at all is a big drawback in most cases. I think you really have to be going first in a game against the decks I just mentioned in order for this to even be good, which doesn't happen all the time. The next card is Disjunction, a 2 power fast spell requiring 1 time influence to play. You may draw an attachment from your void or kill an enemy attachment. Another modal card, and this one is way better than Devastating Setback in my opinion. I think if this was going to be run in a main deck, it would have to be in something like Chalice Control or maybe Ikaria Gold. I don't think your generic time mid-range deck running Xenon Obelisk wants this. It has to be a deck that is completely built around their attachments, like the ones I mentioned. Maybe token decks like Praxis Tokens and Shimmer Pack want this, but in the case of Praxis, they have multiple ways of providing board-wide buffs, especially now that we have Tessia. This does get back curse cards too though, and we seem to be getting a lot more of those in this set. So it may end up being viable in more decks in the new metagame than the ones we have now. I would keep an eye on this one. Next up is Alu Death Dreamer, a 6 power 2/5 unit requiring 2 primal influence to play. She has flying, and she summons Nightfall, and when you play a curse, you play a 3/3 unseen with a random battle skill. So this is one of the reasons behind all the curse cards in the set. The community needs a new Bay. in my opinion. Choosing between Team Seraph and Team Icaria is getting boring. I want Team Alu to be a thing. She kind of gives me Katana vibes from Mortal Kombat. But anyway, onto the card itself. So while there have been a few curse cards with potential shown so far from this set, overall they haven't been that impressive. And unfortunately, despite the okay stat line, I think Alu seeing play will depend on if we get more good, cheap curse cards. Otherwise, she'll get passed up since you need to get more than a 2/5 flyer that summons Nightfall out of your 6 drops in my opinion. Since the unseen token you get has a random battle skill, you are incentivized to flood the board with them. And the way you do that is to play low cost curse cards. Permafrost is pretty solid, and Wanted Poster has potential, but everything else we've seen so far isn't exactly constructed viable. While it's nice to curve Alu into Azindel's Gift, I think if she's going to see play in Feln, they need more good curse cards than what they have now. She's far more likely to end up in a Huru deck so far. The rest of the unrevealed cards will determine if Alu sees play in the Dusk Road metagame. The next card is Great Kiln Titan, an 8 power 9/7 unit requiring 2 fire influence to play. When you play a relic, deal damage equal to its cost to an enemy. At the end of your turn, play the top card of your deck. So I think this has some constructive potential. There are definitely better late game bombs, but this isn't bad. This dies to Annihilate and of course Death Strike, but I'm almost positive that you'll get the card draw before the window opens for your opponent to use those at the end of your turn. Even if you don't, those are the only 2 cards that would stop your draw. And the Fun Police, Desert Marshal as well, I suppose. Someone can correct me in the comments if I'm wrong on the interaction. Regardless, in most situations you will get some guaranteed value for playing this, and that is what you want from your 8 drops. Backing up to the first ability though, I could see Armory possibly playing with this card, although Icaria is generally better. Fire Justice Primal decks do run some amount of relics and relic weapons, but they might not have the room to fit this in since there's so many other cards they want to run. I think what's more likely is that this ends up in a new archetype that we don't have right now. Maybe a Praxis deck focused around relics. Time has some pretty good ones in Power Stone and Xenonopolis currently. Maybe some will be super greedy and pair this with Temporal Distortion. We might even see this in a Fire Time Primal deck with some relic focus featuring our new friend Curiox. I'm keeping my eye on this one for sure. So this next one actually came from the Spanish community, and I'm just going to read the English translation. The translation we have so far is as follows. This is Infernal Fire Oni, a 4 power 3/3 unit requiring 1 fire influence to play. She has an ultimate. When you equip a weapon on Infernal Fire Oni, equip an additional copy of that weapon on her. There is a chance that the name ends up being Hellfire Oni in English instead of what we have here. The effect is cool, but I doubt this sees play in Constructed. While it might be cool to put a Deep Forge plate on this, the base stat line is underwhelming, and it does nothing when it comes into play, and you have to equip this in order for it to be truly threatening. Despite this being a gunslinger, I think even if gunslinger decks end up being a thing, there are probably still going to be better Rakano and Stone Scar cards to run in the 4 slot than this one. This has more draft potential where I think this can be a pretty solid pick. And yes, the translation at the bottom reads, she is an Oni gunslinger, by the way. The next card is Ashara, Ruthless Assassin, a 3 power 3/3 unit requiring 2 shadow influence to play. She has Deadly, and when Ashara attacks with exactly 1 other unit, she gets +4 strength and quick draw this turn. At the end of the turn, she kills the unit. So the art was spoiled on this a while back. Around the same time we heard the word Topple Tower, I believe. I was so hyped that we'd be getting another Ashara card and was really hoping she'd be constructed viable. Unfortunately, while her stat line meets the requirements for a 3-drop, I'm still a little disappointed. It seems like Direwolf wants Ashara to continue to play in that space of having deadly and quick draw. I just think it sucks that she kills the other unit you attack with, which is a common scenario if you're playing aggro at that point in the game. I do think this has a much better chance of being viable in Constructed though than the first Ashara card, simply because Shadow has so few playable 3-drops in Constructed. It's why you see most aggressive or mid-range Felon and Stonescar decks just running their multi-faction 3-cost card as their only 3-cost unit. She might see play in Constructed, especially if a lot of the other units you use have entomb effects you want to abuse. I want to believe she has more potential in draft, but I'll reserve judgment on that. The next card is Silverwing Smith, a 3-power 1/4 unit requiring 2 Justice Influence to play. It has flying, and when you gain armor, you gain an additional +1 armor. So this clearly looks like it's meant to be played in Armory. It reminds me a lot of another card that used to be a staple in Control Warrior decks in Hearthstone, which Armory is a pretty close cousin of in Eternal. Speaking of which, I kind of wish this also was a 2-drop and not a 3-drop because it competes with Valkyrie Enforcer. Yes, I'm aware that Armory generally doesn't run the card now, but it has in the past and could use it again in the future. This is generally better than Copperhall Bailiff in Armory, but the reason you put Bailiff in your deck is to deal with go-wide decks like Rally, which Silverwing Smith doesn't do. This is probably going to end up in a completely different archetype if it's played and constructed at all. I just can't see Armory using this long term. The next card is Shush, a 3-power fast spell requiring 1 time and 1 Justice Influence to play. You silence a unit and each copy in its owner's hand, deck, and void. So this literally popped up on Discord when I first started working on this preview video. This looks extremely powerful, and yet I want to be careful in saying that this will be a staple in Time Justice decks. A lot of Combrei decks get their value from their silence effect being attached to units. I don't think any Combrei deck wants to silence things that may not even show up in a game, except for maybe Big Combrei, which hasn't been in the meta in a while. I think this could be a sideboard card for tournaments, but I don't think Combrei will main deck this. They don't want to give up their silence units to fit this in, and I personally think there is such a thing as too many silences, as good as the effect is. Maybe a Time Justice Primal Control deck not named Chalice would want this. I'd keep an eye on this, but I wouldn't get too excited over it. And the next card is Mysterium Orb, a 3-power relic requiring 1 fire and 1 time influence to play. While this is in play, you have +1 maximum power for each of your explorers, and your sentinels have endurance and overwhelm. So another piece of the fire time primal relic puzzle. We're getting closer to actually building that type of deck, but we still might need some help. As far as explorers in that particular deck, the only truly playable one is Amber Acolyte. That makes the first ability on this kind of strange for Praxis because most of the playable explorers are in Elysian right now. That's all the more reason to think this might go in that Fire Time Primal Relics deck with the new Curiox as a payout card, and not just a Praxis deck alone. Then again, the second ability is a different story in that it gives Sandstorm Titan Endurance twice, meaning that he will still have Endurance if you silence him. It also makes Heart of the Vault even more insane than it is right now. Maybe the Great Kiln Titan that we looked at earlier gets involved with this relic as well. This has potential. I just want to get more playable cheap explorers that Praxis would want to play because I still don't think this card justifies playing Waker of Ancients in your deck. The next card is Vicious Highwayman, a 4-power 4/2 unit requiring 2 fire and 2 shadow influence to play. He has Warcry and Charge, and when he comes into play, you deal 1 damage to an enemy. When an enemy unit dies, Vicious Highwayman gets Lifesteal and Quick Draw this turn. Okay, so Jotun Punter still has the best art so far to me, but this dude looks sick. Props to the art team. They just keep getting better every set. This is clearly meant to be used in aggro decks though. The only thing that sucks is that this doesn't seem playable in the current Stonescar aggro decks we haven't constructed. There's just so much competition at the 4 slot right now. While Warcry and Charge on their own are pretty good, with the competition I just mentioned, all 4 abilities would have to be used for this guy to truly be played over the other 4 drops. And that'll be tough to do if you're using your first 3 turns to curve out with other units. The 1 damage summon ability can pick off a few things, but not much to activate everything on turn 4. I've got a feeling Stonescar Gunslingers would have to be a thing for this to see play. The next card is Juggernaut Birthsong, a 7 power spell requiring 3 primal influence to play. Transform one of your Yeti into a 6/6 Jotun. Draw 2 different Yeti of your choice from your deck. I'm not sure on this one for constructed play. A 6/6 Jotun is sizable. There are a few decent Yeti units you can grab with this card. Wump immediately comes to mind for me. There is Champion of Fury, but he's found in much more aggressive decks that don't want to touch 7-cost cards. And I don't know if a Skycrag mid-range deck featuring a bunch of Yetis and Jotun that would still play the champion would be viable either. At least without knowing the rest of the set. Yeti Pult and Thudrock seem generally fine to grab with this as well. I just still want to see what the rest of this set brings. So far I haven't been enticed enough to play Yetis in the new meta. The next card is Strategized, a 2 power spell requiring 1 primal influence to play. You draw 2 cards, then put a card from your hand on the bottom of your deck. Ladies and gentlemen, it has finally happened. The request that so many blue players have asked for has been granted. I remember more than a few people frustrated that a card like Quarry was given to Stonescar, while Primal is stuck with only Wisdom of the Elders for good draw. I generally don't necessarily believe that Primal should be just like Blue in Magic the Gathering and have the best card draw. Part of me is glad Eternal hasn't been following tradition so far, despite it playing like Magic. But I did want Primal to get something, and this is basically Quarry for them. I think this is still better than Trailblaze, despite it not being a fast spell. Not strictly, just generally. I'm excited to put this into some decks I've got in mind. I guess we can say goodbye to Swindle. It was short-lived, but my time with it was okay. But I expect this to see play in Constructed. Fountain Control will play this, if no other deck will. The next card is Challenge by Law, a 6 power spell requiring 2 Justice Influence to play. You kill an enemy unit and silence the rest. It seems alright. This kind of reminds me of Passage of Eons in a way. This actually kills a unit, but the only bad thing is that there are some matchups where the opponent doesn't really care if you silence all their guys. A 6-cost spot removal is just too much in general, especially in a faction that has access to a 5-cost unconditional board wipe. This either gets relegated to a sideboard card at best in Constructed, or will be an okay pick in draft since removal is kinda like gold there. The next card is Kennel Master, a 1 power 1/1 unit requiring 1 fire influence to play. At the start of your turn, if you have 3 or more spells in your void, play a 2/2 Hound with Charge and Reckless. So, at first I thought this was a fine unit for aggro decks in general, but others were quick to point out that this works much better in Stonescar Sacrifice decks, and I have to agree. Those decks crave effects that can constantly generate units to sacrifice to stuff like Brimstone Altar, or use for spells like Combust and Devour. Kennel Master does that. Of course, they would really like a relic that does that, but the only playable one is Flamestoker, and that costs 6. And I don't think a cheap token generating relic would be good for the game right now. But yeah, this was needed for Stonescar Sacrifice. It's a nice addition. And finally, we have Gear Cruncher, a 7 power 3/4 unit requiring 2 fire influence to play. When this comes into play, you play a 1/1 Grenadin for each Grenadin in your void. And you can also pay 3 and exhaust Gear Cruncher to deal 1 damage to an enemy unit for each of your Grenadin. So while the stat line is underpowered, if there ends up being a Grenadin deck good enough for constructed play, I could see this dealing a ton of damage to problematic blockers in order to get your smaller units through. It's nice that this becomes exhausted to use its ability and it's not a stun effect, so it's only out of commission for 1 turn. The concern is that the only deck that would even run this is some sort of Stonescar Sacrifice deck focused around Grenadins. I doubt this will be viable in your generic Stonescar mid-range deck. One thing I do wish was that this card could also go face. That would have made it interesting. Broken? Possibly, but I don't necessarily think so. Thanks for listening to my thoughts on the spoilers from the upcoming Dusk Road set that we got this past week. If you liked the video, feel free to hit the like button. Let me know in the comments if you have any feedback for the content and what cards you're excited for in the new set. I've got other Eternal content as well, so feel free to look around. If you don't want to miss future content, consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for taking time out of your day to watch this, and I'll see you all soon. Take care.